Welcome to this Cumulus Cycles tutorial on how to enable CORS between two AWS S3 buckets. I've gotten started by creating a bucket to hold the website. I've uploaded the website's files, enabled static website hosting, disabled block all public access, and added a bucket policy to allow everyone get object access on the bucket and all objects contained therein. If I launch the bucket's endpoint, we see the site loaded in the browser. Now what I'd like to do is to create another bucket to store assets, such as images and a JSON file which will hold contact information for sales reps of the company. The JSON file will be used by a new contact web page that will be hosted from the website bucket. And in order for the page in the website bucket to gain access to the JSON file, I'll have to enable CORS on the new assets bucket. So I'll start by creating a new bucket to hold the assets. I'll give it a name, and I'll enable ACLs. I'll scroll down and disable block all public access, and acknowledge, and then create the bucket. I'll then go into the bucket, go to Properties, scroll to the bottom, and enable static website hosting. I'll enter file names for the index and error documents, even though this bucket will only be used to host assets, and save changes. Next, I'll upload the assets. Inside the image folder, I have the images for the site. And inside the data folder, there's a JSON file with contact information for the company's representatives. I'll upload both, scroll down to permissions, and grant public read access, and confirm. Finally, upload. Then I'll go into the images folder, select an image, and test to make sure it's accessible via the browser. And it is. Now I'll head back over to the website bucket and delete all the objects. Next, I'll copy the path to the images in the assets bucket, then jump over to VS Code and modify the index.html and error.html files to point to the images in the new bucket. And I could test these locally. And we can see the assets are loaded, and if we inspect them, we see they're being served from the website assets bucket. We'll test the error page quickly, and that looks good, so we'll go ahead and upload the new files. And jump back into the browser tab that's serving the page from the website bucket and refresh. Inspect, and we see the image being served from the assets bucket. Next, let's jump back over to VS Code and take a look at the new contact page. If I load this in the browser locally, we see we're missing an image, and we see we have contacts for East, Central, and West sales representatives. Going back to the code, we see that the source attribute of the image element is trying to reference a file named contact.ping. Now that's not in the local code folder. That needs to be served from the assets bucket. So we'll have to upload that image into the assets bucket. We'll go ahead and save the code with the correct path. Down in this section of the page, there's a div with an ID of contacts row that's dynamically populated. That's this row which has the contact information for the sales reps. If we scroll further down, we see that we're including a scripts.js file, which when we look at it, loads a file named reps.json, traverses the file, and each time through gets the current data and sends it to the display rep function, passing the rep and the contacts row. The display rep function dynamically creates the div which has the contact information and appends it to the contact row. If we look at the reps JSON file, we see it's an array of JSON object literals. However, although this page runs fine locally, we need to serve the reps.json file from the assets bucket. So I've modified the path and saved the file. Now we'll go back to the website bucket and upload the contact HTML page as well as the JS folder with the scripts.js file, and we'll upload the contact image to the assets bucket. Then if we go back to the browser tab that's serving the web page from the website bucket and load the contact HTML file, we see that the page loads and the image is being served from the assets bucket, but we don't see our contact information. If I go into developer tools and into the JavaScript console, we see that we have a CORS error that we need to resolve from the assets bucket. So in the permissions tab of the assets bucket, I'll scroll down to the cross-origin resource sharing or CORS section, edit, and paste in a policy, which will allow GET requests to the asset bucket from the website bucket and save changes. Now if we go back to the tab and refresh, we see the data for our contacts being provided by the JSON file, which is being served from the assets bucket. And in the network tab of the browser, if we inspect the reps JSON file, we see it was a request to the website assets bucket for the reps JSON file, and the response has the data needed to dynamically display the contacts. And that concludes this video on how to set up CORS between two S3 buckets in AWS. I hope you found it useful.